Hey guys, thanks for coming to the React Native meetup today. My name's Arohan and I'd like to talk to you guys about building intuitive components for an interactive fitness app. First, a little bit about me. I'm a full stack developer at Theatre UK and we are hiring. So if you're watching this live or remote online later at some point on YouTube, maybe do get in touch. And I specialize mostly in React Native and Django as well. The product that I want to talk to you guys about today is slightly different from most of the projects that we usually do. And so I'm super excited to get started. The app in question is the MyARC Fitness app. So MyARC Fitness is an app for fitness content creators or influencers and their followers to essentially train together in one place. So as a fitness content creator, I can go onto the MyARC website, sign up, and then create different workouts and workout plans for my followers. And then my followers can then download the MyARC app, go through there, select me as their favorite trainer, and then complete workouts in the app. There's quite a lot of different features as well in this app. So, a dashboard to track your progress and your stats. There's video tutorials, notes, and there's also a nifty sort of rewards-based gamified system so that premium subscribers can get discounts on real-world products as they complete workouts. So it's a pretty feature-heavy, feature-rich app with a lot of different sort of things, but the most important part of the app is the Workout Now feature. So the Workout Now feature is essentially the place on the app where users spend most of their time. And this is where they go to complete workouts that the influencer has sort of set them. So here, for every sort of exercise in a workout, we have a different screen, as you can see on this video that I've just got from their Instagram. And we have the exercise name, the number of reps, and the amount of weight that you need to lift, if any. And you can have exercises that are either rep-based or time-based, as you can see here. We also take into account any rest time that users need to have in between exercises or different sets, and everything is essentially taken care of so that you can follow along even if you're a complete novice. When we initially designed the section, this is what it looked like. So we have the exercise name, reps, weight, and then the section towards the bottom where you can sort of navigate and edit what you've done. And the initial feedback wasn't great. Users said that the bottom section especially was a little bit cluttered. The previous button was not used very often, which kind of makes sense in hindsight because you wouldn't go back to an exercise that you've just done. It was also prone to accidental taps because of the way that users interacted with the app. So often they'd sort of pick up the app, see what they needed to do, put down their phone, complete the exercise, and then pick up their phone again. So in between, successive picking up and putting down of the phone, their fingers could often accidentally touch one of these buttons and then sort of trigger things that they didn't want to be triggered. So that was another issue. The edit mode is also pretty unclear and it wasn't very intuitive. And in fact, 40% of users did not describe the Workout Now section as intuitive and easy to use. So this was a real problem that we faced. We knew that other fitness apps did something similar and had a lot of the same sort of buttons of editing and next. And we really wanted to do something different. So, even though we took on the feedback and, we got rid of the previous button, we replaced it with an edit button. We got rid of the icons, and before that tried a bunch of different icons for edit mode. We really wanted something quite, starkly different to what was the current state of the art and what we see in a lot of fitness apps. And to the product team, it was super important that the MyARC app was known for its intuitive, easy to use design. So for inspiration, we looked to the principle of skeuomorphic design. So skeuomorphic design is essentially the idea of designing UI components to mimic the real world. So, a great example of this is the UI that came out the very first iPhone and first few iPhones. As you can see, all the icons on the left have shadows and reflections and look beveled and kind of replicate real life buttons. And I think in addition to this, as you clicked on these, the phone could maybe vibrate or have a sort of click or a different kind of sound to basically feed back to users that they were actually clicking on buttons. And this was super useful because during the time that the first iPhone and smartphones came out, people were moving from having a lot of buttons and having that sort of tactile feedback to just tapping things on a glass screen. So this is where, skeuomorphic design really helped people to navigate iOS devices especially. And of course, over time, as people got used to, tapping buttons and using smartphones, we moved back to a sort of flat design that you see on the right-hand side, where there's a lot less, shine and bevel and things like that. And I think, a particular example of this is I think the biggest, difference between the two sides is probably the Instagram app. If anybody remembers what the Instagram app icon used to look like, on the left, we literally have, a 3D logo of a sort of camera. And then on the right, it's just completely abstracted away. And I think, for the time, I think both these logos are pretty good for what they wanted to achieve. Another example of skeuomorphic design, which I, having talked about it, I absolutely couldn't pass up on describing, is Logic Pro X's interface for instruments. So Logic Pro is a software that musicians can use to produce music. And of course, you can select a range of different instruments on there. And the amazing thing is, if you select an organ, and this works with a few other instruments on there, and you want to change the settings of this device, you actually come up with an interface that looks like an actual organ that you can sort of change things. And I have an example of it here, which is pretty cool. So as you can see, I can change the dial up and down as I want, toggle switches, and change a lot of the other settings as I wish. And I'm not a professional organ player at all, so I don't really know what I'm doing here, but you can see how if you were an organ player who had played for quite a while and wanted to move into the digital space, this would be incredibly easy and intuitive for you to pick up. And so this is the kind of thing that we really wanted to replicate going forward. For our specific application, what we looked at was the very, very original iOS lock screen, where we have this slide to unlock feature, which I think is, one of the, original iconic designs that I think we all probably remember. So with this slide to unlock feature, you have the text that tells you to slide to unlock something. And you also have the lovely sort of springy feel, because if you don't unlock, if you don't slide all the way, it springs back. And if you get to a certain point, then we have the click sound, if people remember, that then unlocks the iPhone and then you can get in. So we wanted to implement something like this that would give users the feel that they were unlocking each exercise as they went on to. But it was also super important to the product team that users could just as easily edit any exercises that they were currently doing, because it was super important to them to have accurate data and have users be able to accurately track their own progress. What we essentially wanted was a slider that slid both ways. And that's where the double slider component sort of came in. So you can slide to the left to then toggle edit mode and change things on the app. And then you can slide to the right to, go on to the next exercise. And, what was great about this is it had an intuitive design. It had the helper text as well that you can see with the save and the next or the edit. It followed the principles of skeuomorphic design. And my personal favorite, it didn't involve any buttons. So there was not the classic, edit button or the next button that we see on a lot of other fitness apps. Once the design was initially done and we agreed on it, we started to look online to see if we could find anything in terms of pre-built components that existed. And we couldn't find anything for this double slider specifically. So we decided to make our own. Now, on top of this, speed was a priority. We were, really prioritizing getting quick feedback and iterating in feedback circles kind of quickly. So the team went to use a library that they were very familiar with, which is the React Native animated library, which is inbuilt and comes out of the package with React Native. Let's have a look at some code examples. To start off with, we just needed to set up our container and our toggles. So the container I'll refer to as this sort of gray pill that you see in the background. And then the toggle is this purple circular item that you can scroll back and forth. There's not too much special going on in terms of code here, but it's just there so that you guys know as I refer to the container and the toggle, that's what I'm referring to. The next step is when we start to get the animations in. With React Native's animated library, there's two things that you need to set up, generically for any animation. One is an animated value, some sort of value that changes as the UI thread renders. And two is a panhandler or some sort of gesture responder. So something that essentially can, track taps or can trigger handlers that can track as you tap on a screen and then feed that back to whatever component you need to. So we have the animation set up for this, and then we sort of implement it in the component. So let's have a look at the animation setup first. So as I mentioned, you set up an animated value, and then you set up this pan responder as well. And the most interesting part of this pan responder here is the on pan responder move and the on pan responder release functions. So as the pan responder moves, we have access to this gesture state, which essentially tells us how far the thumb or a finger press travels in all directions. And we've taken the dx value here and we set it to this animation value every time the pan responder moves. So for every frame that it moves. And then we have the on pan responder release function, which is triggered, as you guessed, when you let go of the pan responder and your thumb press or finger press comes off the screen. And when this happens, we want to set this value back to 0, which is where we initialized it as. The plan is to use this value to replicate the X position of the toggle as you move it left and right. We also have this use native driver true option that we pass into the config. As some of you probably know, React Native runs on two different threads, the JavaScript thread and the UI thread. The JavaScript thread is usually used for all the main renders and the sort of logic that you have in the app, and the UI thread is used for the animations mostly. I mean, I'm abstracting here, but generally that's what it is. And using use native driver equals true means that all the animation logic can be run on this UI thread, so it makes your animations performant, essentially. And one of the drawbacks to this is you can't always have use native driver true for everything. And I think you can for this animated spring function, but not for pan responder functions. And so, that's a whole different talk as to which animation library is the best. But for now, that's what use native driver does. Next, we have the component setup for this interactive toggle. We essentially take the pan responder's handlers and we pass it into this animated view object that we can wrap around our toggle component. And then we take the animation value that we had defined and pass it into the translate X attribute, which then transforms the toggle to move left and right as you press left and right and drag left and right, I should say, on the screen. So that's how we get the basic animation of the double sliding spring. Next, we have the text opacity. As you can see, there's this edit and next text that we have that obviously tells users how to slide in terms of editing and going to the next. And what we wanted was, as you scrolled, that this text disappeared because we didn't think it would be a great UI sort of functionality to have a toggle sliding over some text that you could still see or still read. So once again, we first set up the animation and then we implement it in a component. This time, the animation setup, again, it involves an animated value, but the functions are slightly different. We have this on pan responder grant. So this is triggered every time you tap on the pan responder or the toggle in this instance. And we want to set this value of label opacity to 0. And then when we release the pan responder, we want to set the value back to 1. And as you can see with these functions, we couldn't use the native driver, which is why the native driver has been set to false. It's just a gotcha of the library. Then we've got the component setup, where we use this animated text component that you can again get from the React Native animated library. And this time we pass in the label opacity to the opacity attribute of the text. So then as we tap on the toggle, the text becomes transparent. And then as we release our hand, the text becomes opaque once again, and you can see it. Finally, we've got this extra descriptive text that we also wanted. So you can see it says next exercise or edit exercise. And essentially what we wanted to do with this is couple the transparency of the text to the X position of the toggle as you slid it back and forth. So for this, we needed to use the interpolate function provided by React Native's animation library. And this interpolate function here, as you can see, essentially takes one animated value, takes the current value that it is, and maps it to another animated value. So here we're mapping the animation value to the left text opacity, and here we're mapping the same animation value to the right text opacity. What we're essentially saying is, as this value goes between 0 and 75% of half the slider width, so that would be at the rightmost position, we want the left text opacity to go from 0 to 1, which essentially means as we slide to the right, make sure that we can see the text on the left. And then we have the exact opposite here, which is as we slide to the left, make sure that we can see the text on the right. Once we've got that, we can take the left and right text opacity values, and again, as we've just done before, pass it into the opacity attribute of an animated text, style it accordingly so that it's in the right position, and then we've got this ready to go. There was also a few other things that we did and we chose to implement. So there were toasts at the top that let you know when edit mode is on, obviously toggling edit mode itself, and also some circles that let you know where to swipe to, because obviously if you don't swipe all the way, then you don't get there. You don't get to toggle each. Putting this all together, we finally had the final component, which looks something like this. So you swipe to the left and you can edit the exercise. You had the toast that comes up at the top that tells you the edit mode is on. You can toggle, you can use the plus and minus buttons to change how much weight you lifted. And then once you're done, click next to go on to the next exercise. And your changes are saved as well. Once we implemented all of this as required, I think over the course of a few days, we went out and did beta testing with the same users. And it was great to see that 90% of the users now actually reported the Workout Now section as intuitive and super easy to use. And I think every user, even those who didn't list the Workout Now as super intuitive, said that they really, really like the slider, and it's one of the main attractions that they had at the app. And to be honest, I kind of see why that might be, and maybe I'm a little bit biased, but swiping left and right as you complete exercises or as you want to track your progress more accurately is a really good feeling for users to be able to sort of unlock the next exercise. So that was the reason behind it, and that's what we did. And that's how we essentially tackled the problem of making the Workout Now section of the MyARC Fitness app intuitive and easy to use. Thank you so much for listening, and I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have.